Hey, I'm Cal, and you're listening to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things cEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. Today, I'm joined by Matt Sperling, a perennial Pro Tour competitor with 3 top 8s and time spent in both the Rivals League and Magic Pro League. He recently got into cEDH and has dived in head first. Today, he's here to share his thoughts on deck building philosophy, things multiplayers and 60-card players can learn from each other, and plenty more. But first, I'd like to talk about our sponsors. Today, they are TCG Player, Dragon Shield, and Patreon. If you're looking to get cards and you're not going to your local game store, give TCG Player a try for the best prices on the internet. When you receive them, make sure to protect those brand new cards with Dragon Shield accessories, just like Playing with Power does with our own personal collections. Dragon Shields are the best in the business when it comes to protecting your collection. After that, take those brand new cards for a spin during our webcam leagues, play days with our team over on our Patreon. We also have those Moxmaster tournaments. Give those a check out. You also get all kinds of benefits for your direct support. Finally, consider picking up merchandise from our store. We have dice, coins, tokens, sleeves, and playmats. Any purchase helps support the podcast. Check out the podcast description for links to everything mentioned today. And without further ado, let's get into this great chat. Hello, everybody. I am here with Matt Sperling, longtime Magic the Gathering player, professional Magic the Gathering player even. You may call it that. And quite recent, by my understanding, cEDH convert. Matt, thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the conversation.
So, Matt, as you know, a lot of people who play cEDH might not be that familiar, actually, with like the traditional 60-card spiky tournament grinder, et cetera, scene. So you wanna give us a little bit of your background? How'd you get into Magic? How'd you end up grinding? How'd you end up winning a bunch of stuff? You know, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so I started playing Magic in like 1994 when I was 11 or 12 years old. And I worked at that time. I would hang around a sports card shop, and every now and then I would, take the trash can out and they'd give me a pack of baseball cards or whatever. So it was like my first sort of job, quote unquote, when Pogs were popular. This dates it. When Pogs were popular, I would help them, work the Pog counter, and was a little like helper. And I just loved it. I loved being in that environment, comic book, sports cards, and then Magic was added to that scene. At least, sometimes it came to you at that time through a comic book shop or a convention or a gaming store. For me, it was like the sports cards, comics type of connection. And I just instantly loved it. It was like everything I liked about baseball cards and then everything I liked about sort of gaming and fantasy and stuff like that. And at that time, like casual, I mean, there was just Magic. There wasn't,
that was your one option.
Verticals. Yeah. So you just played Magic, and it was casual because it was you and your other 12-year-old friend, trying to figure out how the rules worked, and we had it wrong in a bunch of funny ways and all that stuff. And then the years go by, and it stays fun and interesting and exciting. But then you start to figure out, okay, like I like the competitive part of it. Maybe I shouldn't just play against my friend at school. Maybe I should also figure out how to play at a tournament nearby or whatever. So as I got a little bit older and checked out that tournament scene, I really took to it. Didn't have a lot of success right out of the gate. So it took me several years to sort of have any success at tournaments. My first tournaments are, 05, 1 and 6, whatever. And that's just getting the hang of it. But then eventually, there's Pro Tour qualifiers come out. That becomes a thing. And I eventually qualified for a Pro Tour in the year 2000. So many years ago now, but also several years into my sort of having first picked up a Magic card. And then my success at the Pro Tour level. So there used to be this, Pro Tour qualifier. If you do well at that, you get to qualify for the Pro Tour. And the Pro Tour, I did not have immediate success at that either, right? I had to go through several different re-qualifications through PTQs again before I had any success or even made a day 2 of a Pro Tour. And then eventually, I might have been like 2012 or 2013 or something when I had my first Pro Tour top 8. So it took a long time to break through that. And I was playing sort of over the years at different levels of consistency and, how much time and effort was I devoting to at different times. It sort of varied, but it took a long time to get over that hurdle. But that was always a fun part of the puzzle for me, was figuring out how to push those competitive impulse, hone them, right? Push them into some kind of sharpening function and figure out how to become better at the local scene to then get to the next stage and figure out how to hone those really high level skills to get to succeed at the Pro Tour. And again, only through sort of perseverance and obsession with keep continuing to try did I eventually have some success at that pro level. And then now sort of, and professional for me never meant like full-time, that's my 9 to 5 job. It just meant like,
there's not very many of those. Yeah.
So that's sort of how, that's roughly sort of how it moved from casual start beginnings into more of a professional setting.
And then you ended up in the MPL in 2022, right?
Yeah, the Pro Tour sort of morphed and changed into Mythic Championships and then into like the Magic Pro League. And I did find myself first in the Rivals League and then did well in the Rivals League and made it to the Magic Pro League. And then that was the last year of the that MPL structure.
Congratulations, you made it. We're going back to the Pro Tour.
And that's the thing. It's like all the different versions of it. At the end of the day, you're just trying to win at Magic, and that's been consistently fun. Whether you called it a Mythic Championship or you called it a Pro Tour or this or that, ultimately, like I still found a way to make it work and didn't shed too many tears over one version giving way to the next.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like obviously, you kept at it for a long time. That's from like '94 when you kind of picked up the game to. You said like 2012 was your first PT top 8?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably misremembering. Something like that, 2012,
something
2014,
like that.
something
Yeah,
in
something
there,
like that. Yeah. But it's like, you said it's a long grind and you were on and off. What do you think kept you with the game that long? Just the love of competition, the love of the game? Both? All of the above?
I think like, the friends you make along the way, whatever cliche you want to use for, the bonds. I mean, look, at the end of the day, once you put in those years of, eventually this becomes a huge part of your life in a number of different ways. So to reconnect with people, you might pick up a pre-con because you say, hey, this will be a way for me to get back in. And if you've taken a break, for example, or you've sold your collection, things I've done several times over the years, you might come back for this reason or that reason. Ultimately, like, the best man at my wedding, someone I met through Magic, someone I traveled around and played Magic with, right? So you think about the impact it has on your life. It's bigger than, oh, do I feel like attacking and blocking today? There's a lot of different reasons to stay connected to it. There's reasons to care about the history of the tournament scene, of the game, and all that stuff. So it becomes just over the years like a huge part of your upbringing. So Magic in some ways might mean to you what Hot Wheels means to somebody who collects Hot Wheels, and at the same time, it might mean what Scrabble means to a tournament Scrabble player who has all these different connections that you form to the hobby itself, but also to the people that you traveled with, played with, spent time with. And so all that stuff sort of means that you never really take both feet. You might take one foot out of the scene or of the game. I never really took both feet. I was just sort of curious about it, interested in it.
That makes a lot of sense. You talking about that does remind me about, like, I've read so many PT reports or whatever, and it's some old pro who's been around for a decade, and they're like, yeah, I played Magic today, and then we played Magic on day 1, and then here's 2 paragraphs about the dinner we had with all of my friends.
Yeah, for sure. That's the part you miss. That's the part. I mean, if you take when you are on a break, you'll miss, like, that's the FOMO you really have is, we all, we did karaoke and whatever you did at the night of the tournament. Yeah, that's like, you're going to miss that. And yeah, I mean, you're not going to miss like figuring out your sideboard plan or something like that, right? You'll miss like some of the competitive aspects and sort of that test and that zone that it puts you in, that focus. If you're like me, it sort of can be hard to find focus in life in general, but this is one thing that sort of puts immense pressure on the situation. It helps you focus, and so you miss that and getting into that flow state, and you'll miss hanging out with those folks and seeing folks that you traveled with and all that stuff. So yeah, definitely like a number of reasons the game was sticky and reasons why when you might step out, but you'll step back in.
That makes a lot of sense. And so obviously you've had this background. You've been playing Magic the Gathering, I hate to admit it to your face, longer than I've been alive. But I that's the case with a lot of people, I guess. So, and you had this long experience and relationship with what many people in the cEDH or EDH community just called 60 card Magic, 40 card Magic, Mm-hmm. But relatively recently to many, you were introduced to cEDH. How did that happen? How did you get started in competitive Commander?
Yeah, it was relatively recently. It was within your lifetime. So yeah, in the
it was exactly
recently. And no, this is like several months ago or something. At this point, I forget, but not years, right? Months, not years. I just sort of got connected to it through sort of, I think, mutual friends, maybe like Brian Koval or someone that had been posting about it. Maybe also like Brian DeMars had posted maybe some lists. I don't know. You see lists of different formats, and I've sort of I have enjoyed playing multiple formats over the years. I've never been the guy or gal who has a pauper deck or 10 pauper decks, but not also a modern deck and a legacy deck lying around somewhere. I've always had sort of multiple, when I've been active in Magic, when I've had a collection, I've had
a real Magic dabbler.
Dabbling in this, dabbling in that, and getting bored with this or that if there weren't incentives or just things get stale. This is just shirts from the Star Wars card game from the 90s. I might be super into this for a couple months and playing and loving it, and then through no fault of it, I might get a little bored with that. Or you talk to me in 3 months, maybe I'm a little bit bored with CEDH, and I'll go do stuff.
Oh damn, Standard's really cool right now. Yeah,
and then I'll circle back to CEDH, right? Or I'll circle back to Star Wars CCG, or I'll circle back to Modern or whatever. And so that's part of the fun for me, right? Is not being just that one thing all day, every day for 25 years. You want, but for, different things. So CEDH was just one more thing to try. I had really experienced the pain points of EDH, regular EDH for competitive players, where struggled to figure out my swim lane in that scene. And even playing with friends that I've known for a long time, I know judges and people, so I'm playing with people that are probably household names in the EDH community. I don't know, but just trying over the years, it's like, I don't know, I'm either bored or I don't know how hard to try, or I don't know whether my deck is going to even be at the high enough power. So it's not always just trying to back it off. It's also like,
it's just like, is it good enough? Oh, is it too bad?
Yeah. So just struggling with that, and then also just understanding that for me, like, watching somebody make 30 squirrels, like, I don't know how to say this without, I don't want to sound jaded. I'm not saying you shouldn't have fun making 30 squirrels with your deck, but for me, like, that's not like a night of fun for me, right? Is watching somebody make 30 squirrels that everyone goes, whoa, that just wasn't my thing.
Whoa, those are 30 squirrels.
Yeah. Again, like, not to knock it, but you have to understand what you find fun. And for me, what I find fun, it's really the swords coming together and that clash, and that sort of, there's a battle that has multiple sides to it. And as opposed to, we all stand around, I like to use this analogy of, like, sort of having these display swords, and we all sort of, we get together and talk about, hey, like, check this out. Like, this is so cool. Maybe it's ornamental. Like, there's nothing wrong with that inherently. There's nothing, like, no one has to get upset that there exists like an ornamental sword that wasn't made for the battle to the death. But, that wasn't what sort of scratched the itch for me. So CEDH was like this thing where it looked like, okay, this commander thing that's obviously super popular, that obviously offers something really compelling on many levels, but done in a way that gets rid of some of those issues. And obviously, this is me explaining math to Isaac Newton or whatever, right? Like, this is, you obviously know very, very well that stuff. But at the time,
I definitely get it. Yeah,
it was new to me, and so I was just, okay, let me give it a shot, and that was my entry point.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And would you say that, like, once you did jump into it, did anything really surprise you? Were there anything once you started playing that you were like, oh, this is a little more X than I thought, or something like that?
Yeah, something that actually it actually dovetails a lot with this Star Wars. I don't know. Good thing I wore this shirt, right, for whatever reason, because I keep bringing it up. But it dovetails with it because in this Star Wars CCG game where you play more of like one copy of a card as opposed to four, there's just deck building, I find to be really, really fun. And cEDH actually did that in a way for me that I don't know that I've found that very often in 60 card formats to the same extent or with the same sort of thing. So building the deck, I don't know if it's more fun or the same. It's probably more fun I have in total building decks, tuning them, talking about deck construction, thinking of, as my head hits the pillow at night, I'm thinking, hey, should I be playing Miscast or should I be playing, Veil of Summer in that spot? And well, Veil of Summer's been a little bit bad when I have to be reactive. And like that, those sorts of decisions are like, that's just as much, if not more fun for me than playing a game of cEDH where, maybe maybe those are fun too. Again, not to diminish that, but for me, like that deck building, that puzzle was really fun to solve, and not solve, but just to even work on, And I continue to have fun with that. It hasn't gotten stale, at least yet. I'm sure at some point it will. But, being able to understand what is different about the cEDH format, how that impacts these deck building choices, and then just like all the cool things you can do. And then to really, again, push the envelope, sharpen the sword, whatever metaphor you want to use, cEDH offers a really cool opportunity to do that, and then to go stress test that idea and have it not just be up to someone's artistic vision about whether 30 squirrels was enough, but to actually be about, hey, did I win that game? You can go stress test your idea. It's just really a lot of what I like about Magic showed up there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that was one of the reasons why I said, "Oh yeah, I gotta talk to Matt Sperling," because you're the one person who I've seen get into cEDH from like the known TM spiky background, who actually has been like messing around with a lot of decks. Like, obviously Bryant Cook is working a lot on Rogrex Silas. Koval has put a lot of work into Blue Farm. Yeah, exactly. Thraben Yu plays, but he very quickly found Winota and said, "Oh yeah, this is for me. There's Thalia in this deck. This is for me," type of thing. But you've been the one person I've seen that I'm like, "Oh, who has a Kinnan list?" And somebody's like, "Here's Sperling's Kinnan list." It's like, "Oh, here's Sperling's Cody list." Oh, Sperling's been working on Splicer. The only person I've seen take Splicer seriously because it's fun and cool and different. And he's also working on this one and this one and this one. And I think that's been very fascinating. So you have been doing that because what you find interesting about cEDH is instead of having up to 15 4-0s to work with, you have 100 1-0s to work with.
Yeah, I think like it offers both opportunities. It offers the opportunity to play the same deck over and over again and have different experiences. And so if that's what you're into, like again, I mean, who am I to say that you shouldn't be into that? No, it's not that. And like that's fine. And like I could play tomorrow with a deck that I've played a lot with already and have fun in the game. But I just also aside from that, find it really fun to the challenge of figuring out exactly which pieces are going to work best together on this new deck, and sort of surprising somebody with something that maybe they haven't seen before, or helping to just refine maybe something that was just an idea 4 days ago is now a deck. And that sort of thing, those can be exciting puzzles too. So I think for the folks who come in from 60 card, and I think they probably do skew a little bit more towards like, let me just find my deck and my comfort zone, and then see if I can get really good at. Okay, again, like there's nothing wrong with that, but I want to ultimately, especially when I'm new to the format, sort of cut my teeth on a bunch of different stuff. And later on, if they announce a cEDH tournament where I'm playing for money that can change my life, maybe I'll have to ultimately go back to the concept
time to polish up Blue Farm. Yeah.
Fine. I mean, okay, maybe we'll see. Or maybe at that point, but until then, like I just have a lot of fun finding new and different puzzles. And that's again, if you look at it like a 100 piece puzzle and figuring out sort of how these things fit together, well, intuition is maybe strong in this deck, but not so strong in that deck. So as opposed to having a simplistic view where I'm a Rogside player and I hold the opinion that Reanimate is overrated or whatever it is, then that's different. I want to have a more nuanced position. I want to say like, well, I know that of the many decks I play, I know that Reanimate might be a good card in these 4 decks, and it might be not so great a card in these other 6 black decks. Like I want to have that develop. I want to get to that depth of like understanding how these pieces fit together. So cEDH for me is that kind of thing. And I'm interested in stuff like, if I could only put, 900 cards in my cEDH, like if I was going to make 900 proxies and hand it to somebody, say, hey, welcome to cEDH, you can build all the playable decks or whatever out of these 900 cards. Like I'd be interested in like building that list. And so that's what I end up doing in practice is like working on that type of thing. Just a broader challenge than like how to get good at one deck, but I find it fun.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And honestly, that's one of my favorite things about like working with Playing with Power is incidentally because we make so many videos. There's only so many of us. We kind of just have to have like 5 to 10 decks on hand, like at all the time. And we have to be decent at them so we don't get BTFO'd in the YouTube comments. And it like really forces us to experience more of the format look at a bunch of different cards in a bunch of different contexts. That is honestly awesome. It's much in the same vein as you. I think that's one of my favorite things about cEDH myself. But I gotta know what is it about Splicer? What is it about Splicer? What has drawn you to this cursed Magic the Gathering card?
First of all, if I may offer a quick correction, it's Slicer.
Sorry, Slicer, not Splicer.
No,
Splicer is something else entirely.
A common mistake.
I had that exact mistake the other day. I looked up Splicer on Scryfall and was rewarded with a bunch of Phyrexian Golem makers.
Every time I go to type Otawara in a deck list, I can't remember if it's OTA or OTA. We all have these things where yes, so no harm, no foul there. But just for the record,
our weird little brain hangups. Slicer, he's
muscle.
Please don't sue me, Hasbro. I'm messing up your IP. Please.
And so sorry, and of course, in my urge to correct you, I forgot the question. So, what was your question about Slicer? Remind me.
Yeah, it was what is it about Slicer? You're like one of the few people I've seen that kind of just have taken the deck seriously and have played it a lot and have been tweaking it and stuff. What is it about the weird little Magic card that throws a cEDH game on its head?
Well, yeah. So I'll connect what you said to two things. I'll connect it to the card Slicer, and I'll also connect it to the overarching principle about sort of what the good players consider the bad cards and bad decks. So first.
Yeah, for sure.
First connecting it to Slicer itself, I think it's a really fun, well-designed card in that there's more than meets the eye in the design in terms of you look at it and you're like, first you have to figure out how the card works, and that is sort of its own mountain to climb. Because okay, so I'll give it to my opponent. They can't sacrifice it. Okay, it's goaded, so it can't attack me. But wait a minute. Once two players have died, then it can attack me, or can it? And you have to Google, how does the goad ability works, right? So figuring out what the card does is like the first hurdle. But once you get through some of those hoops to understand it and understand the deck, it's actually pretty cool. It gets you back to a really sort of combat focused and like aggressive style in EDH. And I like it because it's really hard to find that space in cEDH where like attacking somebody for 3 or 6 matters a lot, or playing a spell where whenever someone plays a spell, they take 2 damage. Like having that not just get ignored requires your deck to be doing something else that also deals damage, right? So cards that you think might be good coming from a 60 card background, like Eidolon of the Great Revel or Pyrostatic Pillar or whatever, and then you go like someone has to explain to you, no, someone's just gonna like combo off and just take 6 and like it's who cares. But Slicer sort of turns some of that stuff on its head because it does do so much damage so quickly. Blocking all of a sudden becomes important.
Player can die in a turn rotation if they're not careful.
Absolutely. So then you go, okay, now chump blocking is something that becomes important, and combat math, and double blocking something that has double strike. Like these things that don't typically matter in cEDH all of a sudden matter again. That's fun to me because it's a new side of the puzzle that I didn't get to explore when I was over here with this deck. So now I'm exploring that part of the puzzle. I find that really interesting. It also exists within a space of how to make stacks decks competitive. And I had to learn the hard way that when your stacks deck doesn't really have a good way of turning that advantage of slowing other people down into a win, you end up with a lot of quote unquote like second or third place finishes where you did a lot to impact the game, but then somebody else eventually wins it and Slicer sort of naturally gives you that tool to avoid that problem. You will still sometimes get into second place because again, like, someone, you kill this person that they had a stack piece, their Drannith dies with them, and all of a sudden that happens. But anyway, it's an interesting also piece of the stacks puzzle in that it gives you that clock built into your command zone. So that's a couple reasons why Slicer itself is really exciting. And then how it connects to like the general thing the observation you made that a lot of players might have been dismissive about a deck like Slicer, myself included. I even said in my little write-up that, at first I was like, okay, this is some kind of joke. They've got this mono red Transformers card that I never bothered to read the third sentence of because I sort of looked at it and was like, sort of like use stereotypes to assess the card.
Okay,
like,
you're playing a new mono red card. It's EDH, whatever. I'm going to do my thing. Right. Sure. Yeah.
It costs $5. It's aimed at some like top-down Transformers IP design. It's obviously aimed at EDH with it's like a group hug thing where you get control. Well, it turns out it's not quite the group hug I thought it was, but like at first glance, like that's what the card looks like, right? So you're
everybody
really,
gets to play with Slicer. You just
so you're dismissive.
It.
I mean, you wouldn't be shocked, but you'd be a little bit surprised at how much of my time talking to other sort of experienced 60 card tournament players is spent just getting them to not be dismissive about certain concepts and ideas, right? Because that, Magic has whatever. Magic has 50,000 game pieces. How many cards have been printed? Magic has thousands of game pieces, and if you're not dismissive about huge swaths of them, you'll never be able to make a deck because you have to sort of sort through that. So you develop as a tournament player this attitude of like dismissing the bad strategies and bad cards, so that it's like almost like a defense
so you can
mechanism,
focus
right?
in. Yeah, exactly.
So that your brain can
actually
possibly
focus in
start
on
to
something.
comprehend
Yeah.
it. And sorry, I'm sort of talking over you as I get excited about
No, it's all
these
good.
concepts. You can tell this sort of gets me going, right? And that's sort of what I'm talking about, right? As I connect to that concept of like maybe taking a second or third look at a dismissed card, a bad card, really interrogating it. Is it really bad? Why does that person think it's good? Why did that person win a game with a deck that I think is bad? Like, if I'm not asking myself that question, then I'm really not setting out to learn. And if I'm not out to learn when I'm new to a format, then who is that in service of, right? So that's how to connect it to like the bigger picture of cEDH for me, is like showing up as a learner. I get a chance to do plenty of teaching too, just because maybe I tried a card that no one else tried on my team or something, and I get to talk. So you get to be in both modes, but never losing sight of like, hey, I have a lot to learn. I'm new, and if I'm dismissive, I'm probably just closing off some stuff to myself.
That makes a lot of sense. In that vein of learning and stuff, do you think cEDH, playing cEDH, messing around with cEDH, talking to cEDH players, etc., have you learned anything like new about Magic generalized? Have you learned some new Magic the Gathering lessons?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, without question. Understanding. So yeah, some things just by virtue of like multiplayer. I mean, understanding sort of a threat assessment. I mean, there's a bunch of examples. It's a clear yes. Like there's a lot you can learn.
You can definitely take time to think about it too, and we can cut out the silence. The podcasting.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot going on. You have how your game plan, like how your card choices need to connect to like a coherent game plan where, it's gonna feel good. Like there's a common pattern in cEDH that comes up more than it does in other types of Magic, where like you might play a gameplay pattern that feels good. It's psychologically pleasing to, for example, maybe counter somebody's key spell, or maybe like slow the game down for several turns so that you can cast your big commander. But then, okay, that might feel good, but if it's not leading to results. So cEDH also asks you, if you're going to play a tournament setting, if you're going to sort of keep track of your results, whatever you're doing, in cEDH specifically, you really start to think about how does it connect to actually winning the game. And in that exercise, I have learned about sort of the different role, even in one-on-one, when I'm in the control role, understanding whether a card is really just scratching some kind of like psychological itch versus like really working with my game plan to help me win the game. So yeah, that's just an example of some of the things that really have came into sharp focus when you start to play multiplayer.
That makes a lot of sense. Multiplayer is a beast. It's a fascinating thing. You can lose your games to your opponents, theoretically. I think people talking about that's a little overblown myself, but that's because I like to talk to them and convince them to do what I want them to do.
Sure.
When you're playing against good players, that doesn't work as well, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
sometimes,
yeah, I mean, exactly.
I don't know. There's two sides to that coin too. You're playing against good players. I mean, I think the strong arm tactics don't work, but then
they don't work as well. Yeah,
they might be even more receptive though to actual like rational argument about what their interest. So you might be able to convince a good player.
Certainly,
if you have an argument that, hey, this is actually in our mutual best interest, they might be more receptive to that than a player who's like skeptical about, well, he's just saying that that's in my best interest. So yeah, those things are really cool about multiplayer. I think I've tried to explain to folks who haven't got into it yet that can be scary and feel like that's going to be a barrier to you having fun. Is like these, but like ultimately, once you get in there, it's like it's not that big. It doesn't really form in practice, in my experience, a big barrier to having fun. It's just like another thing to explore. And it's also not the most important thing going on in cEDH either.
No, not exactly that. Yeah, and I definitely agree with what you were saying about the smarter players and stuff. I don't mean to say that smarter players never listen to other people or whatnot. In fact, I think that one of the biggest level up moments that a cEDH player can have that a lot of people aren't that great at and could learn to be better at is kind of the notion of that, like, a lot of times in normal EDH games, people will be like, oh, this person is the threat. They have done this big one scary thing and they are the threats. And for the next 10 turn cycles, they are the threat and whatnot. And I think a lot of people can bring that kind of philosophy over to cEDH, where all of your opponents are the threat. And this person is playing Najeela. So no matter what they do, they're enemy number one because they're playing Najeela. When in reality, like at any one point in time, as priority changes, as we go in between turns, as it can change the littlest bit from game action to game action. Anyone at the table is like your closest ally or your like biggest enemy at any one moment in time, because to a point you're like all in it together, because if player 2 wins, then oops, player 1, 3, and 4 didn't. So as long as nobody has won, you're all kind of in it together, trying to stop whoever's trying to win.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can convince people to help you out.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think right. I think you can definitely make the mistake of being too closed off to working with folks. You can also, think about, hey, well, I can just go it alone. Either, my deck is set up so I don't have to. It's well, no, that means you're not maximizing your opportunities. But also, like I said, it's not like the most important thing in the world. I mean, if somebody said, hey, like I don't do tabletop, it's not like they're gonna be bad at cEDH. Okay, they're not sort of, doing the whole every possible thing. But anyway, so I think there's a lot of sort of fear and uncertainty about that from the 60 card community. And then the 100 card community, like you said, it's more about sort of picking up on getting into more of a headspace of like, I have to be flexible. I have to sort of understand things at a slightly deeper level and not just do pattern recognition on like you said, oh, Najeela means threat, or somebody played Winota. So whatever the case, like the scary things need to be assessed in context, like a good example, like you were saying. So yeah, all that stuff is lessons that folks can learn. But again, you're going to have, in my experience, more fun than frustration if you're coming from 60 card to 100 card in picking those things up and in figuring out, oh, actually, if I had stopped for a second and asked that player, explained to them, I mean, things will open up to you and become really cool. Like one thing I started doing that I think I just picked up from somebody else, maybe not, or I can't remember where it started, but whatever it is, if my tutor is shut off by your opposition agent, maybe I want to ask you, hey, if I tutor, will you agree to get removal for this other person's Najeela or their Dranith or whatever's annoying us both? Like, just like if I never do that, what's going to happen? The tutor's going to rot in my hand. I'm waiting to top deck remove your like. Isn't that worse than like us working on maybe me and you together can solve this problem over here? So that becomes not so much a frustration. And maybe it's actually less frustrating now because now I have another way to use my cards, my tutor doesn't, and I have another way to make a deal with to advance my game plan, even though your opposition agent sort of stopped me. That's like an example that really highlights it for me. But when you start to get creative, when you start to step out of your comfort zone, you're more like opening up pathways than you are sort of like entering this new scary world of like let's make it. Hey, how about this? I tutor, you grab Swords to Plowshares, and we move on. It's not that complicated, Well, but what
exactly.
What if you backstab me? What if I tutor and then you grab Underworld Breach? Okay, then that's the last.
You got me.
That's the last.
You got
time,
me.
Yeah, that's the last time we'll make a deal, and maybe my win rate didn't change that much. At least I went for it. And then, next game.
And now I know maybe the next time we play together, I won't trust you as much.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's all good. And you don't have to lose sleep over that situation because honestly, like you play with someone a couple of times, you probably have a decent understanding of whether they're the type of person that's going to say, hey, yeah, I'll get the Swords of Plowshares and actually get it. So you figure that stuff out as you go. And it ends up not being all that terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. That was great. Thank you for that. I appreciated that.
Yeah, let's make a deal.
I want to change gears a little tiny bit here and kind of move towards your experience actually playing cEDH. I've seen you grinding out the Playing with Power League from time to time, grabbing some games in there occasionally. I've seen you play games in a server we're both in with quite a lot of invested cEDH players. And then I know you competed like in a little tiny cEDH tournament that was like at Magic 30 Vegas. Mm-hmm. And I know that you were at Silicon Dynasty. Mm-hmm. How would you say that in almost like those, in those different environments, how do you think your experience has changed? And did you, especially like post Silicon Dynasty or whatever, would you say that you felt any differently about cEDH compared to like there can be a pretty big difference in between like jam and webcam games with people who maybe aren't that experienced to playing it in person with theoretically people who are at least invested enough to, fly to San Jose, California to jam games and stuff. But I meandered a little bit. But do you think your perception changed at all after that kind of experience?
Yeah, I don't know when this is going live, but on March 11th, I'm playing a tournament, which is in the future now. Maybe it's in the past when this is coming out. But either way, I'm playing a tournament on Saturday. I'm just really excited about it, right? Why am I excited about it? Well, in part because I like Magic tournaments, but also in part because I had a lot of fun in these other couple events that I've played. So I've only played a couple, like you mentioned. Silicon Dynasty, the one in Magic 30 went really well. The Silicon Dynasty one went not so well. So what? You play a couple of games, you're going to win some, lose some. But just had a ton of fun. I thought it was really, again, it just added depth and complexity to the puzzle that it's actually really hard to predict what's going to show up in your pod, in pod 1 versus pod 3. Maybe if you win the first 2 pods, maybe then your pod's a little more predictable. But either way, like, it's really fun. And also, like, maybe a card, maybe even in your card choices, right? Maybe a card like Lightning Bolt plays better out in the wild. We call it in the wild when we're talking to, some of my friends and I are talking about, like, am I playing on my server in the wild? Maybe Lightning Bolt plays really better in the wild than, something that like Wear and Tear. I don't know. You can name a million examples. Well,
I totally get it.
That type of thing just adds complexity, adds layers. And also the folks I was playing with were trying to win. They were sort of the spirit of cEDH was there, where they had their own take on decks focused around their command. So it had the EDH stuff that's you like, but also these folks were trying to win and taking the tournament seriously and thinking about the timing of the round timers and stuff, which I'm used to in competitive Magic. So it just felt like a really good marriage of cEDH and tournament Magic and hanging out with people I've hung out with online, in person, and playing a tournament. So all the things, anyways, scratched a lot of the itches that I think a Magic tournament ought to. And so it made me want to go back and do it again, and looking forward to this next one coming up, the Fishbowl, that I'm playing. So yeah, it's like definitely, I recommend it to folks who are either just like playing, just getting into it, or not sure if the tournament is even, hey, we have this debate on this fake debate on should you even play EDH in a tournament? Well, the answer is I saw a room full of people having a really good time, having fun. And so, yeah, why not?
That certainly makes a lot of sense. And there are definitely a lot of quirks to trying to put together a multiplayer tournament scene where everyone's, doing their thing. But yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun with it. Every time I see somebody talking about it online, I try to control myself, because there's a lot of people who haven't experienced it or haven't gone to an event or whatever. And they say, oh, what about these things? And we're like, well, we figured that out. Or, well, yeah, we know, but we have fun.
Yeah. I'm the same as you. I have to stop myself from responding to all of the examples. I mean, we saw one recently where a player said, hey, I'm coming from Tournament Magic. Here's some things you should know about cEDH. Like, sometimes you're going to lose because the table like feeds a fish, and it's like, well, I just wanted to respond and be like, well, don't you recapture that equity every time you have a fish out and people start feeding it? Like, even taking that at face value,
it kind of evens itself out over time.
Yeah. You're probably more likely to play Ristic or Remora. You're more likely to play one of those enchantments than other folks, and some of them are not playing blue or whatever. And then great, so you play that card, and then you're going to recapture the equity. And if you're worried about the fact that it adds some variance because sometimes they have the Remora, sometimes you do, well, look, like none of it. We decided not to play chess.
I have bad news about the mana system of Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The mana, like, we all decided not to play chess, right? Or Go, and for better or worse, like, those games are still there. If you really want to go play, if you really want to go study chess openings, like, there's great resources for you to do so. And I'll wish you nothing but the best of luck on that journey. But the Magic journey is a little different. The Magic journey is more about sort of figuring out how to get a couple percentage on, how to weight that coin. And so it doesn't matter if it's about getting mana screwed in one-on-one, or it's about someone feeding the fish too much. You'll recapture that equity when they're making the mistakes in your favor as opposed to somebody else. Or I'm really worried, these players ruined the tournament for me because they made a deal that excluded me. Well, that's not, sometimes you're the one making the deal, or you can get better at that. That's a skill you can hone. So Yeah, I agree. I'm just like you, sort of sitting on my hands when I see those tweets of, okay, I'll just let this one go. I don't need to respond to all of these. I don't need to become like the CDH apologist, but I'm here for it if anyone has questions about how to make those arguments.
I have found that reducing the amount of time that I spend replying to people on Twitter is directly related to an increase in mental health. So,
Yeah.
it just works out.
Yeah, if you and I both never responded to someone that we don't know again on Twitter, we'd probably be happier for it, and Twitter would probably be better for it. But I don't have that kind of willpower, so sorry.
No, sometimes it just slips. No, exactly. Yeah. I'm totally there with you. Believe me, as somebody who is on Twitter a little too much, but yeah, exactly. I did just want to change gears one last time, going all the way back to brewing cEDH decks, because that is what you have been in fact doing a lot. Would you say there's like a specific way that you approach brewing a cEDH deck? Do you take somebody else's list, see what they've been doing, try it out for yourself, say, why would anyone be playing Miscast? I should be playing an offer you can't refuse, or what have you. Not exactly like that, but do you have an idea in your head and then you make it? Do you find what other people have been doing and you tweak it? How's that been looking for you?
Yeah, and again, this isn't a recommendation or a judgment. It's neither of those things. But I start from like a blank slate. And I sort of look through I've got this long box that says cEDH on it, and I go through there, and I might pull out 120 cards that the most reason I did it, I'm playing Malcolm Vial Smasher in the tournament on Saturday, and to build my Malcolm Vial Smasher deck, I pulled out of my long box all the cards in there that I thought might go in a Malcolm Vial Smasher deck. I thought about other, maybe. I don't know. Maybe there wasn't a Glinthorn Buccaneer in that box, but I knew from having played.
Gotta go find one.
That one might need to go. That one might need to make its way into the box. So just having an understanding of sort of what and then eventually, maybe this might not even happen before I play a game, but eventually I might play a game first with my cards to figure out what I like, what I don't like, and then eventually I'll figure out. Let me look at some lists. Maybe I'll do that as part of the deck building exercise, maybe not. But so it makes sure I don't miss something, or make sure. I might want to consider a Spectral Sailors. I mean, who knows? Those cards you miss, right? There's so many Magic cards you can't just have a pull up as a reference off the top of your head. But I like to start from that blank slate and my own intuition about what ought to go in there, because I might surprise myself, and I want to sort of, I don't know, I want to have a lot of different colors on my palette before I start to paint, as opposed to saying, well, other folks paint this type of scene with these 5 colors. Let me stick to those. Oh, well, I can always wipe off this color. Right? So I like to sort of start more broadly, think, borrow from this deck or that deck, something that worked well, or cards that I think in general are more valuable. So I don't like the card and offer you can't refuse very much. So the fact that somebody else is playing their Malcolm Vial Smasher deck, that's not super compelling to me that I'm going to. So anyways, that's a lot of words just about sort of having an exploratory type of process, as opposed to more of like a trial and error, like try someone else's list and then tweak from there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess that does explain why I remember when you showed up to Magic 30 and you spiked this 16-person event that Zane put on, or however many people it was. Somebody just shared around your Blue Farm list and everyone was like, wow, this is spicy. I haven't seen 15 of these cards in a Blue Farm list before. Was that your approach to that list?
Yeah, and it's not life and death, right? Maybe one day.
Yeah, exactly. We're just playing Magic the Gathering cards.
Maybe one day we'll have that tournament. I'll be happy to play in it where we're playing for life-changing money. But these aren't that. So if I make a mistake, if I'm trying a card, if I put Wandering Archaic in my T and K list, which I have it in there right now, then what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to lose a game and Drake's going to yell at me or something, right? That's what I'm risking. So why not try a few things out, right? And also, if the fun of it for you, or for me, I should say, is learning. I'm new to the form. I want to learn at a fast pace. Honestly, I like to say the rate at which what you're doing sort of drops information, if you think about a video game, right? The rate at which so. I'm testing for a 60-card tournament also right now. That's another story. The regional championship here in San Diego is coming up. And in that turn, like I wanted to test a card, and my teammate said, "Well, I don't know if 2 is going to be good. You might want to put 1." I said, "Well, yeah, but if I put 2 in my deck for testing, it's going to drop
You'll
information about the
actually
card
see it. Yeah,
at a higher
exactly.
rate." So a deck with 2 copies of that card is going to drop info about that card at a higher rate. So similarly with Malcolm, trying 10 new cards that aren't in the stock list it might drop hidden gem information about Malcolm at a faster rate, whereas I can figure out later how good Dispel is, or I might already know you know what I mean? So I think like that type of thing, thinking about like the rate at which your process is dropping new information for you, and you're going to learn. If you're in that learning mode, that testing mode, that can be really important, just like a general like R&D type of exercise.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. I've never actually personally thought about it that way. It does make a lot of sense to just be like, all right, I'm trying out these 10 cards today. Let's go. Let's see how this goes. Because yeah, I've done a lot of little 1-card changes for, I play a lot of Malcolm Tana, Glinthorn. And I've done a lot of little 1-card tweaks here and there and I end up playing the card for like the deck for 3 or 4 recording sessions or at a tournament or whatever with this one little card tweak. And I never see that card. It's a 100-card singleton. I don't have card advantage in the command zone. I'm not tutoring for it. I just never see it.
Yeah.
But if I was trying out 10 cards, then I would learn information about 6 or 7 of those cards over that period of time, rather than just being like, oh, I'm going to change this one little thing.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to fail. And you're talking about like, hey, a couple things there. The fact that it's hard to get the actual practice. So when I published my slicer list, and it was like, hey, like here's what I've been trying. There was a card in there that I thought was good, but I hadn't actually drawn it and played it, so I didn't know that it doesn't actually work. The Reaver Cleaver, it doesn't actually work with Slicer the way you want it to, like because you want equipment that gives you the ability, doesn't give the creature the ability, right? And so that shouldn't be in the deck, and it's not in there anymore. And so the things to understand there is that, first of all, you have to make decisions of cards that maybe you haven't had 20, 30, or even 1 rep with. You still have to make decisions because it's just hard to get those reps in cEDH. And second of all, you can't be too afraid, so paralyzed by the fear of that embarrassment that happens if your card doesn't work, or again, like, whatever. Like you cut the card, everyone, like when you share your deck with someone, they go like, wait a minute, you're not playing such and such, and there's that moment of like fear and doubt. You have to try to push through that. You don't have to, but I like to try to push through that. And if I get embarrassed because of my, that's fine. Who cares? Like this happens, and it's happened to everybody where you put a card in your deck and it stinks because it doesn't do what you thought it did. Or it stinks because, there's this line of text you forgot about, and with your commander, oh crap, it never goes to the graveyard or whatever it is. What I mean? We all make those mistakes all the time. These games are so complicated. So just try stuff out, if my advice to players, and honestly, like think about what your goals are, and if learning is among them, think about how what you're doing supports doing that at a faster rate.
Certainly, and yeah, I reps in cEDH is really hard. You're definitely right about that. Like even if you're in person with people who know what they're doing, there's a big difference in between trying to play cEDH fast and like how many games and how much information you can learn playing in a PT testing house as quickly as possible with somebody else or whatever. There's like a pretty big gap there.
Oh yeah, it's huge. It's huge, and like some of the assessments you have to make are just you have to use intuition and judgment. You can't just so like I want to put a really good card in my ad nauseum deck, but the card has a high converted mana cost. How much is it going to cost? How much equity am I losing? Like, I don't know. If I conclude that Misdirection would be a great card for my ad nauseum deck that wants to protect Malcolm, for example, right? Well, I go, okay, I know I strongly suspect I would want it if it had converted mana cost 2. Do I want it? And so like that type of thing, like, I don't know. There's a lot we could say about that if we were doing like a deep dive on deck building, but the fact of the matter is I'm not going to be able to go get 10 games with Misdirection and ad nauseum hitting Misdirection and understand how to balance those two things because I've got a bunch of and even 10 wouldn't be a huge sample. So how am I possibly going to get a huge sample of games understanding both sides of that coin, how good Misdirection is when I draw it and how bad it is when I ad nauseum into it? Good luck. So I'm going to have to use an intuition that I have to generalize. I have to think about the times where I flipped over my Bulls of Citadel and use those to inform my intuition, even though it's not the card Misdirection. And I have to think about the times that I had Deflecting SWAT and it was good to understand that other side of the coin of how good. So anyways, like this stuff is just like really fun for me. I think the way my brain works and the way I engage with Magic is really fun. And I think for some, maybe it feels a little bit overwhelming, but you can always ask other folks for their experiences, leverage that, use that to expand your sample. Hey, Drake, have you had experiences with this card wandering archaic or whatever? And, and he'll tell you, it's the worst.
How do you think about the card Sylvan Library, Drake?
Yeah, and
he'll feel like that one.
Have you ever heard of asbestos? Or that, he'll find a way to convey that, he doesn't believe in using that to build anymore, right? That's sorry, we don't build with that around here. Okay, fine. But yeah, anyways, you can talk to people in the community that you'll form if you start playing this game, and I like the communities that I've been able to, all of them. And so ask people, hey, have you guys had experience with this card? Let me know how it went, because there's no way I'm going to go get 20 reps with it.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. That's just so smart. Just leverage other people. We already talked about that tonight. We already got there.
If you want to edit the podcast so that it leads with that clip of just you saying, that's so smart, and me nodding along, and then we can maybe put that in.
And then we can just go into the rest of it.
Yeah, that's the lead in. That's
just so smart.
It's just so damn smart. And then you're just going, yeah.
Oh yeah. I am a genius, actually. Thank you. Well, I do appreciate you being here with me today, Sperling, but I run a tight ship, and if this podcast goes over 60 minutes, then I'm immediately fired.
I don't want that to happen.
No, I'm not immediately fired, but we do have a little bit more time left, but I'm out of questions I wanted to ask you. You answered a lot of my questions while you were talking in classic fashion of somebody who knows what they're talking about.
In classic person who likes the sound of their own voice fashion.
I'm a journalist by training. I've done a lot of interviews with people in the past, and there are people who are very good at answering questions before I have asked them, and you have done that here tonight. Before we sign off, is there any more wisdom that you feel you need to impart upon the listening audience, whoever that may be?
No, I think we touched on, I found a way to sort of hit the notes I wanted to hit. But I think for the folks that are coming from I'll give one takeaway to wrap up for the folks who are coming from a 60 card background, so to speak. Another one for the folks coming from more of a 100 card EDH background, right? For the 60 card background folks, just spend some time thinking about whether you're still learning about cEDH at the pace that you want to learn about it at. And if not, think about how to make a tweak, adjustment to what you're doing that might unlock some of that for you if that's something you're interested in. For the 100 card folks that are coming over and thinking about, well, first of all, how to get the most out of cEDH, and second of all, maybe do I eventually want to make the leap over to 60 card or something like that? For those folks, I would say take the things that we're saying from the 60 card background with a grain of salt. A big part of my experience has actually been that players like me with my background are often too dismissive. They're often sort of not understanding what is unique to multiplayer and the way that it does sort of balance things out and make things, brings powerful cards oftentimes back into under, the reasonable realm of the table's control, because you have three people that are trying to answer and stuff like that. Take that with a grain of salt. So even though we like to hear the sound of our own voice, and we'll go on and on about how great we are and our decks are and stuff like that, don't give up on the intuitions and insights that you have coming from that more multiplayer background, and look for opportunities to really maintain that as you pick up some of the things that are valuable from the 60 card or competitive landscape. Try to hang on to that, because again, I just want to express some respect for that background of multiplayer, understanding those multiplayer dynamics, understanding sort of how cards that maybe look like they're just kind of cool cards also have a place. They're cool for a reason, and sometimes that reason can be really powerful, and other players may have dismissed them. So anyways, something for everybody there in my takeaways, but I'm having a lot of fun. So then thank everyone for, including me in these games, these communities, because I'm having a ton of fun. And that's still true, several months later.
And of course, as is the tradition of the end of any guested podcast, would you like to tell the people where they can find you on the internet if they want to find you on the internet?
Sure. I've got my cEDH articles are up on the articles section of the Eminence website. Eminence is the tournament software and organizing space in cEDH. So you can search like Eminence articles and find those, or find Eminence on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Sick of It. So I'm often tweeting about cEDH. So yeah, you can find my stuff and me in those places. And hopefully you'll find me on podcasts like this in the future. This was a really fun conversation. So hope to do it again sometime as soon as you think of more questions that I didn't answer.
I definitely agree. And thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Thanks again to Matt for joining me on this episode. I encourage you to really think about everything he shared today and maybe give it even a re-listen. Whether you come to cEDH from a 60 card or an EDH background, I think there's a lot of great stuff that we can all learn from on this episode today. Make sure to give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast aggregator. You'd be surprised how much you can help us out. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. All those links are in the episode notes. Come hang out with me on social media. I do it all. That about wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Join us next time when we talk more about our favorite format in our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.